First, let me actually start with a story not necessarily about me, but let me start with a story about Lawrence Phipps. I did get to meet him a few times before we got started, or before he passed away. And one of the stories I do want to say is that at last month's meeting for everyone who was here, as the board, we decided to give him a book. And I actually got the book autographed for him. We got it all figured out. And we gave it to John Lake, who you saw interviewing him in there. And he was able to actually pass on the book to John Lake on Monday, and then he passed on Friday. So he actually got to see the book before he passed away and had his own personally autographed copy that was delivered to him. So that's my story there. But that's also a little bit of the story as to some of the importance of the book to me. One of the big things with the book is it's capturing that history. We're only around here for a brief period of time, and this allows us to capture that history of when we're here. And Highlands Ranch has had a lot of history, and so I wanted to make sure we were able to capture it all. So one of the questions I have been asked a lot since I wrote the book was, what was my process and how long did it take? It took roughly about 1 year to get through the whole process. Then they've held it for about 4 to 6 months before they decided to finally publish it. So it came out a little bit later. What we have going on with the book, the process started with an outline. My first goal was to try to figure out what the story was of Highlands Ranch I was going to tell. I knew I only had about 100 pages to tell it, and I knew it was going to be told in about 200 pictures. So how do you tell 100 and some odd years of history of Highlands Ranch in just 200 pictures? And so that was the biggest challenge. So what I came up with is I kind of broke it down. I told a little bit about the early history. How did we start? Where did we get everything to? Went on to the mansion and the ranch history. Started about the early development. And then, like everything in Colorado, everyone loves the outdoors. So I talked about some of the outdoors of Highlands Ranch. And then I got more of the modern history. Because what's going on today, we might think it's modern, but I know there's at least 3 items in the book that literally since I wrote it a year ago have already changed. It is changing that quickly. And what we believe is here today is going to be history real soon. So that was one of my keys in doing this. The next step of the process, because this is a book of photos, is if you're going to tell the story, you have to have photos. And originally I wanted to tell even more about the ancient history of Highlands Ranch, but I just couldn't find the photos for it. So sometimes the photos drive a little bit of what you want to tell too. So actually you'll see more of that in the introduction, is where I talk about that a little bit more. But I got photos from a lot of people. This wasn't a solo effort. About a third of the photos in the book I took myself, but the rest came from a lot of different areas. The Douglas County History Research Center. Blake Graham and Sean Boyd were very instrumental in helping me out there. The Highlands Ranch Metro Districts, Charlie Nolan. Jeff Case was probably most of Chapter 3. Jeff Case, who works there, has over 20,000 photos on his computer. So he just gave me about 500 of them to help tell the story, but that was plenty to get me going. So he's been collecting photos ever since he's been working there, and he's been working there decades. And Sherry Eppers helped me with a photo. From the mansion, Maggie Glass and Susie Appleby. From the Highlands Ranch Community Association, Mark Geibel. The Philbrook Museum gave us several photos. The Douglas County Historic Preservation Board, Reed Farmer on the board, helped write some of the ancient history. Historic Douglas County helped with a photo. The William E. Griggs family, well, their photo, as you'll see, it's actually where I start this presentation with. Didn't make the book, but they did have one of the key photos that I wanted to have in the book. And then my proofreaders, Mark Stevens, Robert Morse, Sarah Lefbosky, and Mike Littlehorn all helped me proofread this book. That's how we get a lot of that stuff done. I also want to give thanks to acknowledgement to the other board members. Nancy got us started on the book process and thought that we could do it and basically kicked us down the road, and I picked it up from there. Sarah, as you heard, helped proofread the book. David Hill's our IT guy. He's the one that puts up all these great presentations and the wrappers and the website and collects a lot of those things together. So he didn't directly work with the book, but he works with everything else that we do with the Historical Society on a regular basis. And so he's very important that way. Actually, I think he actually did photo enhancement, maybe a couple of the photos in the book too, if I remember right. And then Paul McCaig is also one of our board members, and he lent support for the book, and especially as we've started getting into the selling of the book. All right, a little bit about myself. I grew up just outside of Highlands Ranch, up at the corner of Dry Creek and Quebec. I went to local schools, Cherry Creek High School, CU in Boulder, DU. I work locally because, believe it or not, history actually wouldn't pay anything if I decided to actually do this as a living. So I actually have a job as a software engineering and program management in the tech center. I'm also the chairman of the Douglas County Historic Preservation Board. I'm a Highlands Ranch Mansion docent, and I've worked with the Highlands Ranch Historical Society as the membership director, his secretary, and historian. And one of the other questions I get asked a lot is, why did I write the book? And that was for my daughter Ashley, who was born and raised here. So this is part of the history for her too. This is her home, and this is what she's known. So she was a big inspiration there. And so this is the next part of the process, was the actual writing process. This is where I wrote it. This is where I went and got the photos to help tell the story that I couldn't do. And this is where I'm going to move forward. And for our first photo that I'm going to start talking about, it's the one photo that's not in the book. It's the photo I wanted to have in the book. And if you get the book, it's one of the few pages of the book that only has one photo on it. Why is that? Because this photo, they said, was not high enough quality for their book. They wouldn't print it. But this photo is one of those things when we talk about things lost to time. We found this photo of the Griggs homestead back in a book down at the History Research Center that was written by Historic Douglas County. Douglas County Historical Society, which, if you know, the Douglas County Historical Society has gone away itself. It itself is an institution that is no longer in existence. It got broken up into multiple institutions. And so we couldn't get it there. We contacted the family, and what we found from the family was they no longer had the original either. So there's just the low-resolution picture from the book that they had written, and we tried to bring it out. We tried to blow it up. We tried to do everything we could, but the publisher wouldn't take it as a high enough quality resolution. And this is part of what I did with the homesteads. I want to do more of a past and present. So I was trying really hard to find a historic photo of the Griggs homestead. But I wanted to capture it, and I put it in our presentation tonight because, to me, it's important that even what we have of the photo lives on. And so I'm keeping it with this presentation. All right. And in that past and present sense, that's what it used to look like, and that's what it looks like today. We got that one from Historic Douglas County. I actually took a similar photo, but when I took it, all the trees were green, and if all the trees are green, you really can't see the house. So I saw their photo and said, wait, that one's a lot better than mine for the book. So I contacted them, and they gave me permission to use this photo in the book. But it is one of those. It's still standing in almost that exact same state. That was taken within the last year or so. It's back there right on the edge of Backcountry. But as you can see, the elements have taken their toll on it. The next one is one that's actually deep in Backcountry, which is the failing homestead, also known as by the Douglas Investment Company. This building, this is a photo from the early 80s. This is probably when Mission Viejo first took over back there. And this is what it looked like. This was the barn then. And it's another one that the elements have taken their toll on. That being said, I did put the little inset in there, is you have the silo. Whatever they did to construct that silo is still in pretty good shape. So hopefully they can get out there, they can keep it, they can restore that silo. But the barn itself has had significant loss since over the last couple of decades. The next main homestead of Highlands Ranch, and this is one of the things that makes Highlands Ranch interesting, that I love, is that it started out as hundreds of homesteads, and yet it came down to about 5 or 6 main ranches, and then eventually, as we'll see, it all got into one. But the next big one is the Big Dry Creek Ranch, also known as the Cheese Ranch, also known as the East Ranch, and sometimes the Big Dry Creek Cheese Ranch. So it's got a lot of different names over time, just by who is referring to it. The original homestead was 1877, but as I said in the book, it was really established in 1879, which is apparently they spent another $700 and acquired a lot of the ranches around it, and that's what gave them a lot of things. And people came from far and wide to get out there. Closed in 1938 and became part of the Phipps Ranch in 43. But this, you can see the buildings. And if you want to know where this is located, if you go to the post office that is out there at Quebec and Lincoln, just to the west and just to the north, you see an empty field, and there's a windmill in that empty field. That windmill is where this was. And I say that's where this was because we have this. And there's some more pictures of the barns and stuff. And I would say definitely take in the pictures because this is the first time I really saw these pictures. Because if you go there today, that's what it looks like. Now this one, as you saw, the barn probably had some elements that took a toll on it. The houses were still there. But the story that I've heard is basically you had a bunch of teenagers and others that kept breaking in on the weekends and trying to throw parties out there. So Jim Topher went out there and tore down all the buildings. So Douglas County didn't like that too much, so that also is what founded the Douglas County Historic Preservation Board, which I'm a chairman of, is because they got on Mission Viejo for tearing down the building that they said they would protect. But they got tired of dealing with all the problems with it, so they tore it out, and now we have an empty green field. As you can see from some of these trees in the foreground, they used to have an orchard out there, and they're actually bringing back more fruit trees to kind of bring back some of the orchard area. So they are revitalizing that. Another one of the homesteads, in this, I got at the History Research Center, and it was a very nice picture. This is the Plews Homestead, or the Flying Bee Ranch. This one actually stayed just outside of Highlands Ranch for most of its existence. It was, if you know where it is, it's right up on the northwest corner of Highlands Ranch area. And it kind of stayed as its own. It was a neighbor of Highlands Ranch until recently. When I'm looking at the new maps, it looks like it's now been incorporated. But it's now incorporated as its new instance. It's now the Windcrest. So all those fields that you just saw are Windcrest. The house that you just saw is still there. Metro Districts is paying to protect the house and to make sure that the house remains protected. At least they're doing the exterior right now. They've talked about possibly tearing out some of the interior and making it a useful room inside where they can hold events and stuff. But the exterior they're going to retain as the same. So that is the history of that one. And so I thought that was interesting, how you had all these homesteads, and then they all kind of came back together in the mansion, or in Highlands Ranch. Now, one of the things I really liked with Highlands Ranch, as I started to do the book, and I got a lot of these from the mansion, is actually starting to put together in one book that history that you get in Highlands Ranch. If you ever go out to the mansion, if you haven't been there, I definitely encourage you all to go. They have the Hall of Owners that's out there, where they have all these owners kind of listed. And I've put them all together here on one slide so we can actually see the owners as they've come. Starting with Samuel Long, he called it Rotherwood. Then it went to John Springer, and it was the Springer Cross Country Horse and Cattle Ranch. He's also the one that named the mansion Castle Isabel after his second wife. So that name has also been associated with it for a while. Then after his second wife got involved at the murder down at the Brown Palace, he took off and he sold it back to his first father-in-law, Colonel William Hughes. So he owned it. When he passed on, it went back down to Springer's daughter and Hughes's granddaughter, who just owned it for a couple years and then turned around and sold it to Wade Phillips. Wade Phillips is of oil money, not Phillips Petroleum himself, but that was his brother's. He had his own oil company that was equally as wealthy, and he purchased it for a while. Then we'll also see Frank Kessler. He owned it as the Diamond K Ranch. And the last real owner of the ranch as a whole was Lawrence Phipps Jr. Now, Lawrence Phipps Jr., he owned it for a long time. He lived there. He passed away with the ranch. And he's the one that named it Phipps Highlands Ranch. And that's where the true name Highlands Ranch comes from, is he had used that. As you see before, Phillips had called it Highland Ranch without the S, but Phipps actually added the S. And having both Phipps and Phillips together does confuse a lot of people. And then the last owner after that, but is one that bought it and was the one that turned the land, never really lived here, was Marvin Davis. But he was another one I was going to talk about more in the book. But for being a billionaire, the guy is extremely reclusive in terms of actually getting his photo out in any place where you can get to it publicly. I couldn't find hardly any photos of him, so that is his prerogative. If I can't get any good photos, then he just gets a sentence in the book. But the other thing that I really loved as we were going through here is the mansion architecture. And you can see that in the photos that we captured here. You start at the very top with Rotherwood. This is what it looked like under Long. And the more we looked at that with the windmill, is I think we're starting to believe that we're actually looking at the back of the house here, that the front of the house is on the other side, because you'll see in a couple more photos. But then this is kind of where they start to call it Castle Isabel, and they show it with kind of this photo. And some of these I'll show again here in a second. Then you can see they extended it all the way out, and they added this large third story. Then under Phillips, and you know it's Phillips because he's got his PH on the barn, this is a picture of what it looked like. And then finally, Kessler. And under Kessler, you can see they actually remodeled it, and Kessler came in here and changed the style. He didn't like all the old castle style, so he turned it more into a villa style. And so I thought that was really neat to be able to actually see that transformation. And then today, this is what it looks like. It's still there. It still looks great. So more than 120 years after the original building was built, it is still up, it's still standing, it's still functional. They just finished a $6 million renovation of the mansion a few years ago. And so under Metro Districts, it's got a long future. But as I was saying at the beginning, tonight's presentation, I'm not just going to go over history. My goal here is to actually talk about some of the photos and some of the unique things in the photos. So one of the first photos is this one. If you actually look at some of the different things, first at the very bottom, you can see that there's a saying down here. It says, "Country home of John W. Springer, located in the center of a 12,000-acre ranch." So that's actually been written on the photo. You can also see in this photo 2 people actually sitting on the porch when they took the photo. So there's actually 2 people up there. And another thing that they always talk about is the front door. The front door is over here. It's not in the turret. Today, if you go there, the front door has been moved over here. Now, in this photo, this is where the front door was, and people coming in. You can also tell from this photo that the building wasn't nearly as deep as it was today, because in both this window and that window, you can see right through the front room to daylight beyond. Now it's 2 rooms deep, and that would be a lot more difficult to see that way. So that was some of the unique things you could find in that first picture. The next picture, when I was talking about that windmill, this is something I hadn't seen before. Right there in the center, there's a second windmill. We've seen the windmill on the hill, that's the one that everyone knows. But right here, just immediately in the backyard of the mansion, there's another windmill. That one's unique. The fact there was the third story. For a long time, I hadn't seen any photos that had a third story. So now I've seen several of them, and it had a third story for quite a while. One of the other ones in here that you can see is down here is there's a bunch of sheep that are out on the front yard grazing. And if you're looking closely for people, there's someone riding their horse right there. There's another guy over here on a wagon. But the ones I just spotted recently, there's a guy standing right here. I thought that was a fence post. And there's another guy hiding right there behind that tree. If you look really close and you zoom in, there's a 4th person hiding right behind that tree. So as you start looking at these photos, you can find these little details that you never really saw before. And that's part of what made that photo exciting. One of the other things is we got some photos from the library. And all the photos from the Kessler era, and the library had a very good set. The Kesslers donated a large set of photos. You can see down here the mark of the photographer that was actually on the white frame that they donated. And you can see here that up on top of the hill, they used to have 2 windmills. Water is so vital, especially for a mansion out in this area. that just to have one windmill, the fact that it could break and you could be without water would be horrible. So not only do you have a reservoir up there, but you actually had two windmills to make sure you kept getting water, which is probably why we also saw the two windmills in some of the earlier photos with the one right in the backyard, was just for that same reason. And then I was talking about how things have changed. This is another one that I would say is in that things that have changed. This is one of the first ones. The windmill, with the strong weather this spring, the windmill is not there anymore. The windmill got knocked off. So one of those symbols of Highlands Ranch is currently down. They're hoping to repair it and put it back up. But at the moment, the windmill that I talk about as being a big symbol is not there. So that's one of those changes. Now let's go to the inside of the mansion. This is an early photo back at the Springer or Hughes time. It was taken somewhere between 1910 and 1918. And some of the things that I spotted in here, if you've been looking around, that I thought were interesting, is up here, the lights. You have these little ball lights that are hanging from the ceiling. So I thought the lighting was unique. A big one, and this talks about that being shallow again, is if you've been to the mansion, this is an archway. Here it's a window, and daylight is coming through it. So you know that the window that is the dining room wasn't there at the time when this photo was taken. Other items, big stone chairs on either side of the fireplace. My guess is those would have probably retained quite a bit of warmth from the fire, so they would have probably stayed warm well after the fire went out. Okay. Then moving forward, the next slide here, this one, there's actually two photos here, but this was actually taken under the Phillips era. There's the one you've seen over in the mansion that's got Elliot Phillips sitting on a horse on a bearskin rug right in the middle of the living room in front of the fireplace. That one they bring up, and you see that. The other one is that same living room. Some of the things I've noticed in this photo, they changed out the lighting under the Phipps. There's brand new lighting in here. And there's Elliot again, sitting on his horse. It's right in the middle of the living room. But some of the things I was noticing is if you look here, when they took this photo, there's a bunch of furniture between him and the fireplace, and the bearskin rug's over here to the side. So, like most modern photographers, the photo over here that we see is definitely a stage photo. Those things weren't there when they were taking this first photo from the side. Other items I see over here is you don't have the archways. The front door is right here in the middle of the living room, where we had always talked about it being in the past. And the new one I actually just saw last night, see, even I find things in these photos every time I look at them, is you have a bighorn sheep head right over the doorway. And I hadn't noticed that one before. And then from there, the Kesslers came in. If you notice, the Kesslers changed it up. It doesn't quite look like a hunting lodge anymore. Under the Kesslers, we now have both the arched doorways that we know, plus the arch out to the solarium. The fireplace has been changed out. There's a piano here. And the door, I'm pretty sure, is gone. You can't tell for sure, but when you have all this fine furniture there, you're not going to put that right next to your front door. So I'm guessing that part of the remodel also occurred right here at that same time. So just that transformation from the hunting lodge to this refined social home, I thought was interesting that was able to be captured. But talking about still having wealth, this one was also under the Kesslers. When you go into the white room, a polar bear rug. I'm sure there's not many people that have a polar bear rug. And if they did, just putting it out in the middle of the floor, it's not going to stay very white very long in that situation. So I thought that was very interesting. And this photo was taken in 1937. So that's 80 years ago right there from all these Kessler pictures. Now I'm going to jump up into the 70s. For those of you that may or may not have known, in the late 70s, they actually filmed a movie right here in Highlands Ranch, right at the mansion. The movie was Centennial. It was actually a TV series, a whole series, a mini-series. And it actually came up for 2 Primetime Emmy Awards for Outstanding Art Direction and Outstanding Film Editing, and also came up for 2 Golden Globes for Best TV Series in a Drama and Best TV Actor in a Drama for Richard Chamberlain. So all this filming was done here. And here, once again, there's the living room with the film crew in it. So that living room has seen a lot of different things go on. And for this, they renamed it Veniford Ranch. And for those that drive around, there is Viniford Ranch Road and other things that are named after Viniford Ranch based on the movie Centennial being shot here. And then this is another photo. This is one that I like. They show this one at the mansion at the beginning of a lot of tours. But this is what Highlands Ranch looked like 35 years ago. This is Highlands Ranch. Right there's the ranch buildings. And here is everywhere else in Highlands Ranch. It was that empty. It was that open. And that's what it looked like from the ground when Mission Viejo bought it. Just a lot of weeds, a lot of scrub and everything else. Now, under Mission Viejo, and this is where I started liking this part of the history too, is two gentlemen had the biggest impact on Highlands Ranch. You had Phil Riley, who was the CEO of Mission Viejo. He was in charge of all of their projects across the entire nation. And then you had Jim Topher, who's known as the father of Highlands Ranch. He was in charge of their Colorado operations. Well, by Colorado operations, that was primarily Highlands Ranch. That was his main focus. That's where he put his energy. And as you might know, there's even a park named after him now. But he was here. Now, both these gentlemen have actually also got copies of the book, and they were able to see them. And we got some quotes here. This is a longer quote. If some of you want to read it, you can. But basically what it says is Highlands Ranch was something that they had been able to acquire in whole. And because they acquired it as a whole, they thought that by getting the history and recording the history, that the value of Highlands Ranch and all the homes in Highlands Ranch would be more valuable. And so he was actually really happy and really enjoyed to see the book that we put out, because this is what he had believed from the beginning when they bought Highlands Ranch, was by capturing the history along with the homes, they would really improve the value of the community and give people a sense of community. And I think that that's happened. We also got a book to Jim Topher, and Jim Topher also talked about the book. He talked about what a great job the book was and that we had been putting it together. And then he asked how he could acquire more. Well, you can acquire more right up here in the front after the show. So there'll be plenty of opportunities to buy more. You can buy them from friends, family, everyone you want. So that's exactly where you can acquire more. Now, one of the things that he did, advance two. All right, one of the things that he did was they started the development plan. So as you see here, 1979. So almost 40 years ago now, this was the plan. In this, talking about a master plan, this was the plan for what Highlands Ranch would be in 40 years. So they were thinking all the way back then, 40 years in the future, what is Highlands Ranch going to look like? And one of the things that you notice here is the ring road that goes all the way around Highlands Ranch. And this was actually part of their original design. And one of the things I've heard in several places is they actually designed a lot of the roads not to be straight roads. If you look at Denver and Aurora and everything else, everything is very much a grid. Well, they actually didn't necessarily want that in Highlands Ranch because they didn't want a lot of through traffic to Highlands Ranch. They wanted Highlands Ranch to be a destination that either you came to or you went from, but they didn't want people just commuting right through the middle of the neighborhood. So they actually designed it so that it wasn't a place to commute through easily, that you either came here or you left here. And so they did that, and I think it's really kept our traffic down as development has continued. But they got the ring road and stuff, and here you can see Jim Topher selling the plan of Highlands Ranch to the Douglas County Planning Board in the mansion. That's actually in the mansion. And today, if you look at the roads of Highlands Ranch, you can almost see that same ring road with Highlands Ranch Parkway and then Wildcat. And you combine those together, and they got their ring road right in the middle of Highlands Ranch. So that original design is still there. Where the homes were going to be is still there. If you look at where the open spaces were going to be, those are still in the same place. All that was thought out well in advance, and they've pretty much stuck to the plan all the way through. And so the next thing up was to actually start building the homes. So the first homes in Highlands Ranch, 1981. And if you can see down here, the homes were from the 70s, 80s, and low 100s. That's where the homes started, which back then was still pretty expensive homes. But now it makes you laugh a little bit that that's what the homes were. And this was a photo that also caught my attention for a unique reason. Is I always thought the first homes, because I knew they started around this intersection, were these homes down in this area. Though looking at an article, the first home that was bought by Phil and Kay Scott was actually up here on Coyote Street. So it's actually these up here were the very first homes sold in Highlands Ranch. The intersections are right here. This one is Dad Clark, and this is Broadway. So that's Broadway going south, and Dad Clark going east. So the shopping center and the movie theater would all be over here in the future. And Northridge Rec Center is right there. That's that pile of dirt. And then I also got this photo. This is Phil and Kay Scott signing the paperwork to buy that first home. First official home of Highlands Ranch. And the baby's there, and when I was just working Highlands Ranch days, the guy that was working it with me said, "Oh, that's baby Sarah. My daughter grew up with her." So you do run into people that actually know them. This was another unique one. First down here, the Highlands Ranch first Highlands Ranch Library was right there in the little strip mall that's up there by Northridge. And that was the Highlands Ranch Library. But I got this photo. This was one of the ones that I got, and I just saw her smiling in there. And so I went to the library and said, "Well, who is that librarian that's sitting there smiling?" And no one could figure it out for a while. But they asked around through the library district, and they came up with her name, Andriette Piron. And apparently she now runs a coffee shop in Nebraska. So so that is where she is off to now. But that was one of those that gave me one of those unique stories of finding this, that people went out and tried to find other things. One of the other ones that we talk about as being formative to Highlands Ranch is the creation of C470. So here's some of the photos about C470 before it came in. There you can see the bridges at University, and nothing but dirt for the whole rest of C470. They were just starting it. Here was when they were working on the entry at Broadway. Before that time, to get into Highlands Ranch, the entrance was up by the Wilmore Nursery. You went up the hill and you turned in up by Wilmore, and that's how you got into Highlands Ranch until they finally got this entrance open. But here they were in '83, laboring away to actually provide a real entrance into the community. Talking about building infrastructure, another unique thing with Highlands Ranch, they were thinking 40 years in the future, so they were also out there building the infrastructure years in advance. Here's a roadway. I don't know if this is Wildcat or Highlands Ranch Parkway, but it's probably one of the two, but you can just see the empty fields on either side that they're building it well before there's homes, well before there's anything else out there. They knew the homes were coming, they knew they needed the roads, and so they went out there and they built the roads. So people had this idea of what the community looked like well in advance. Then this was another interesting one. I saw this photo here, and I said, "Oh, two big pipes." And I know there's that big diagonal line that goes right through Highlands Ranch. And so that big diagonal line, I was thinking, oh, this must be the Denver and Aurora pipeline that runs right through Highlands Ranch. I told that to Jeff Case, and he looked at the photos, and he says, "Nope." He says those pipes for that line are at least 11 feet in diameter, if not larger. These are about the size of a man. He says those are the common storm drain pipes, and because they're concrete, that's what would be underneath your houses. So underneath the roads near your houses, this is the sort of storm drain pipes that they put in to get all that water out, to make sure that your houses are safe. So I thought that was very interesting to see the infrastructure that is below the ground where all of our homes are. Next one that I've been asked by a lot of people being in the historical thing is, what was the first elementary school? And here I was able to get a nice photo of Northridge Elementary. So that is the first elementary school. And we got a good photo of that one captured. Next, the first high school. Here's Highlands Ranch High School. This is one of the older ones from Metro Districts because you can tell all the trees, whoops, it went a little too far, but all the trees are really small. But one of the things I did feel like was important to capture in the book was the high schools. Because growing up and knowing how most people grow up, high school is a very formative time in most people's lives. So if they're going to remember one building from their youth, it's probably the high school that they were at, that they remember something about that. So I tried to capture pictures. And I captured all the main high schools. Originally, I started like Mountain Vista here, and I wanted to capture the grandeur of the entire high school. Well, after doing that, I realized you can't really see much of the high school. So Mountain Vista, I actually kept this way. You have a name like Vista, you got to show the whole school. But the other ones actually went back and took photos that were a little more up close. So you got Thunder Ridge, you have Rock Canyon, and you got Valor. So some of the main high schools that are right here in Highlands Ranch that people know, people went to, those are captured for their future remembrance of this area. Next, going back into the rec centers. The rec centers also play a big part of people's lives here in Highlands Ranch. In this photo, I believe is from about 1982. One of the things you notice is you have plaza going through here, but behind it there is no C470. There is no loop up here for the movie theater. It's just all open fields. So you have that. You also have the rec center itself. If you look at the rec center, it doesn't have the indoor pool. It doesn't have the basketball gym. There aren't the racquetball courts, and there's no big tennis bubble. All those things would be slowly built over time to build up Northridge. So Northridge started to become a bigger and bigger rec center. And as another side note, the next rec center wasn't built for 15 years. And 15 years later, they started building Eastridge. So here's a photo of Eastridge actually under construction in 1997. 1997 is when it opened, so this is probably either 97 or 96, right before it opened. But you can actually see where the whole front is construction, including no front door, just being able to go straight in through the front entryway as they're still constructing the whole area. So I thought that was kind of a neat photo of Eastridge. But Eastridge is also one of those that I know for anyone that's raised kids here, you have the pool. Most people have spent more time in this pool than any other pool because it's indoors. So it's open year-round. You take your kids to it year-round. It's got the sloped entry year-round. So anyone that's had little kids. And it's got the big old frog. So I known by quite a few people as the frog pool because of the big frog that's in there. So I wanted to capture that one. And then for the most part, and I've gone back and I've even got some criticism from some different people that I did not put enough of myself in it, like not having my name on the cover in some of those. But one of the things that I did put in this photo is a photo of my daughter. So you can find at least one photo of her. She's right there at a swimming lesson. That's another thing that everybody who's raised kids here has gone through is swimming lessons. Getting them all water safe, getting them all to swim. So there she is at one of her swimming lessons. And I wanted to capture that idea of the swimming lesson. Capturing some of the other rec centers, this is one of the ones I liked for actually capturing kind of the entrance to the rec center. There's something about the way at Westridge, the trees and the antelope out front and everything else kind of frame it, that I like that. So this is actually one of my favorite pictures for capturing a rec center as you kind of approached it. This one I also like the inside for capturing because of the really open gym. You can capture all the stuff that's going on in there. So it kind of gives you that feel. You can see the gym. You can see the field beyond. And you can see like the running track. So that kind of gives you a feel for a lot of it. Most of the other rec centers are a little more closed off and you can feel parts of it, but you can't quite feel the whole entirety of it from one vantage point, as well as Westridge. And finally, I also wanted to capture Southridge here. So this is the final rec center. In this one, the park actually allowed me to capture pretty much the whole rec center by having that big open space of the park. It gave me a good view of the rec center itself. And then if I'm going to capture what goes on at the rec center, I captured one of our meetings. So several of you might actually recognize the back of your head somewhere in there. But after capturing the rec centers, I wanted to go back and actually work on capturing some of the activities. And when you go back to the early age of activities, you deal with Art Cook. Art Cook is the voice of Highlands Ranch. He's the one that did all the original early activities. He's the one that when Mission Viejo owned it, was in charge of all the ranching operations, and really got a lot of stuff going on in the early days. And one of the ones that I thought was interesting that you probably wouldn't see today as much is they actually had the Highlands Ranch community out to watch them when they branded the cattle. So that was what part of Highlands Ranch Days and stuff was before, was they actually were branding the cattle out there right in front of the community. So you can get that real sense of being on a ranch while being in the community. Another one that caught my eye as an interesting one was this one. I don't know, maybe some of you even recognize some people in here, but to me, it was this huge Miller Lite can. I haven't seen a huge Miller Lite can like that in a public event in a long time. So I asked about that. The reason there's such a big Miller Lite can, well, apparently back in 1972, the Mission Viejo Corporation was purchased by Philip Morris. So Highlands Ranch was actually owned by Philip Morris while it was still under Mission Viejo. And Philip Morris loved to sponsor events out here. So you ended up with big Miller Lite cans in the background of your events. Now, coming up with this summer, one of the things that we had going on here was the Olympics. In 2002, the Olympic torch actually ran right through our community. So, running right up the hill there is the Olympic torch, and there's a photo of it captured. And talking with Jeff Case, he said that Courtney Zablosky was actually in the luge from Highlands Ranch in that Olympics. She actually went on to the 2006 Turin Olympics, where she actually placed fourth in luge, which is the highest of any American woman in that event. So our own Highlands Ranch connection to the Olympics right there. Now another one, and this is the one I actually used to finish out chapter 3 of the book, is the AMC Theater. Growing up here, one of the things I do remember was we had a bunch of theaters around. You had Festival that was at County Line and University. You had Southbridge that was just north on Broadway. Well, as soon as the 24 came into Highlands Ranch, all those theaters died out shortly thereafter. They just couldn't compete with the large theater in Highlands Ranch. So this was one that had a regional impact, not just a Highlands Ranch impact when this one opened. But one of the other challenges for me in even doing the book was trying to capture this theater. I know I tried to take pictures from several different angles of it, and I finally ended up with this one. Because I like the idea of the trees as they matured, the bridge, because I always remember pretty much myself and almost everyone else says, why do you have a bridge to your parking lot? It seems really strange. But they put the bridge in because they put the parking lot on the other side of the road. And then it still has the AMC 24 logo in the background. So you could capture all that in one photo. So after taking several photos, this is the one that finally made the cut of the book. And kind of flipping back this cut of the book, remember how I was telling you I was trying to tell the story in the photos? Well, by the time I actually gathered all the photos, I had the story told in about 450 photos. Now for the book, the limit is, it ended up being 222. I submitted 223, but that, as I said, that one got cut out. But how do you cut from 450 to 220? So there's a lot of things where you have to say, is this photo redundant with some other photo? And can I say the story on a different photo? And that's what a lot of this was. So there was a lot of filtering, a lot of down selecting of photos as I went on. Now the next chapter of the book, chapter 4, is about the open space. This is about getting outdoors and how they use the outdoors in the open space. And this is one that's actually over near my house. I live over near the Westridge area. But this is the dog park that's down on Marcy Gulch. So there's Marcy Creek down there, and here's the dog park. And so that tells a little bit of a story. It's the open space. It talks even about a little bit about how they separated the homes, so all the houses aren't right together. The communities are separated by it. But the other part that I captured with this one, and this one actually ended up with pretty much 2 photos in the book, is how they used it for flood control. This was this was spring of 2015. You can actually see with all the heavy rain and snow, it's actually filled up about 10 feet above where it normally is and is actually covering part of the dog park here. So this is the flood control that they've actually put in place. And now if you look down here at the road, they have probably another 10 feet they could go up more, and they even have an extra overflow right there before this would completely overflow. But this is the whole idea, is that with all the pavement and with everything else, they need to slow down the water going downstream so that it didn't all hit downstream and didn't cause floods downstream. And this is how they did it. They didn't do it with big culverts or big concrete ponds or things like that. They did it with open space. And a lot of times they even used the roads, like in this case, to be the buffer at the end of the open space. So a lot of times you'll see that as roads or trails is actually what they use to block the other end of the open space. So a lot of dual use there, and they did a great thing there. Now this one I like for a few reasons. This is actually, I think, the first photo in Chapter 3, but it shows that open space. You can see the paths. Right here is the Spring Creek path that we were just seeing. This was planned out years ago. Wait, no, this one's Spring Creek. This is Marcy Gulch. This is the ones up by the mansion. I think it's Sand Creek. And here's Big Dry Creek over here. So you can see that they had those planned from the beginning. This is early because this is all the homes right there. They have that group and they have this group. All this other area is still open for development in the future. But also this is the big area down here. And I didn't realize it was as big as that until I was talking to Terry Nolan once. And he said that the original goal was 60% open space. And when they finish build out in 2020, they're still on target for 60% open space. So they haven't compromised on that. And now most of that is down here in Backcountry. That's where they put a lot of the open space. But they did work on having all these integrated things in there. The other section, the other item on here that I thought was interesting is right here. I asked people from Metro Districts, who is this? So I can have it in my book. And I had multiple people say they had no idea who this was. And then all of a sudden someone looked at it and said, well, don't you recognize him? That's Jim Worley. Just looked it up. Jim Worley actually later went on to become the general manager of Metro Districts and a director of Metro Districts. So he's someone that is still actively involved with Metro Districts, and yet most of the people in this early photo didn't recognize him. So that's always a good thing. But as I said, most of the open space was down here in Backcountry, and so I had to throw in a good sweeping vista from Backcountry. You have a great view to the south from Backcountry. If you haven't had the opportunity to go back there, get back there. Check out Backcountry. It's got some great views. And one of the items I found, and this one's actually over by Wildcat Mountain, is this wonderful rock formation that was actually back there in Backcountry. Now, if anyone actually knows exactly what type of rock this is, I'm still trying to figure out. Some geologist or something that knows exactly what type of rock this is, so I can always quote it in the future. But the other thing that you can also do in Backcountry is mountain bike. Now this photo has its own story, that as I was looking for a good photo of Backcountry, I was flipping through my phone of all the photos. This is actually a photo of my brother-in-law biking up behind me and mountain biking. And it just happened to be what I felt was the right photo, the right distance, the right size, everything. So I asked him and he said, yes, you can use the photo of me biking up behind you. So I got that one captured here too. Then as I moved on toward Chapter 6, I wanted to start capturing the modern era. Well, one of the items I picked up was all the churches. And you get different things with some of the churches. So I captured some of the churches. I got Pax Christi up here. I grabbed the two really large churches. We got St. Andrew's up here and Cherry Hills Community Church. If you actually look through the book, there's probably about, I think it's like 12 or 14 churches in total that I put in there. So there's more. But then I also captured like this one down here, because this shows, because of the zoning and stuff, they grouped a lot of the churches together. So here you actually have the Mormon Church, you have St. Mark's, and you have Holy Cross Lutheran Church, all together pretty much on one intersection. But that is by design. They gave certain plots for churches. Now the mega churches took the entire plot and just built the whole thing themselves. But the other ones, they separated up and they got a few churches into those areas. And so there are definitely more churches in there. Another one that I found, I know normally we have a pretty good sized contingent here from VI, but I was trying to figure out how to capture that area because I know we have a lot of people that have been there. And this just happened to be one day I was walking down Dad Clark Trail down behind Topher Park, and I looked across and I said, there's the photo, there's where I can capture the buildings. Because if you try to look at it from Broadway, you don't capture very much, or from university actually. But from back here, I was able to capture multiple buildings across the open space. So you got that concept of the open space and the buildings. So that's what allowed me to capture that community and put that into the book. The next one, and I went through and I captured several businesses. But it was this photo. I was trying to get the buildings at Lucent. Well, this was a photo where I was trying to figure out how I was going to capture the buildings at Lucent. So just as I was coming off the freeway, I was literally driving off the freeway, and with one hand, I just pointed my iPhone in the general direction, took the photo, and then when I got to the light and I looked at the photo, I'm like, I captured it. Time to move on to the next one. This captured everything I wanted. It got all 3 buildings. They're close enough. Everything looked good. So this was a photo I was actually just taking to try to figure out where I should go to get a photo, and the photo itself became the photo. So that is the unique story of that one. Next is one that was a little bit more of a debate, actually even among the Historical Society, about whether this should make it into the presentation or into the book. And this is the tattered cover. Tattered cover, as you know, was only here for 10 years. And so, well, what's historic about that? You're here 10 years, everyone's going to forget about it. The reason I actually kept this one in the book, and the reason I really wanted this one in the book, is because the tattered cover, people that were here, was kind of one of the keys in the debate of, does town center go to local businesses or does town center go to national chains? And tattered cover was on the side of the local businesses, and you had Home Depot and some of the others that were on the side of national chains. And the people of Highlands Ranch kept saying, we want local businesses, we want local businesses. Well, by the fact that tattered cover actually only lasted here 10 years, that says that the people of Highlands Ranch voted with their pocketbook that no, they want national chains. Another one that I captured, talking about national chains, is King Soopers. Kind of like I did a lot of grocery stores, there are quite a few, or a lot of high schools, there's quite a few grocery stores in here. Because for everyone else that lives or works in a community, the grocery store is a place they go on a regular basis. So it's somewhere that they know. So this is actually the one near my house, but this one is unique for a couple reasons. One, this is actually one of the second changes that's happened since I took these photos. It used to be open 24 hours. They're not open 24 hours anymore. That's gone from all the King Soopers. My guess is it's probably the economy got better and they realized they weren't making money overnight if they had to pay people more and everything else. So they're no longer open 24 hours. But the other one is this was taken kind of at dusk. And by taking it at dusk, it gave me actually a really good photo that I like for the book, in the fact that if you look, you can actually see inside the store. So by zooming in, you can actually see that there are people going on inside the store. You can see that there's produce inside the store. So normally whenever you got those photos, the inside of the store was so dark, you couldn't see anything inside. You just saw the front of the store. But this one, because it was dusk, the inside is highlighted too. And so that shows up in the book. So that was one of the things I really liked about that photo. And then we also have art in our community. And it's some of the hidden art that I kind of like to have in there sometimes. But for people who have been over by the Target, a lot of people talk about the gorillas. And to be honest, when I first put the book out, this was one of the questions I got asked more than almost any others, is did you capture a photo of the gorillas? I didn't even think about that time. I thought, this will be a little thing that most people don't even realize is there. But when everyone kept asking me, did you catch the gorillas? I did. They're in the book. They're hiding there. They're in the grass. And you shouldn't feed them. Though I also know that these mountain gorillas do not swim very well. I've seen them underwater many a time. All right, coming up next is another one of the interesting stories that I heard when I got this photo. Is if you look, this original fire truck, I thought this was a great photo when I got from Jeff Case of a guy and a boy and a dog and a fire truck. You can't go wrong with that in a book. But the real history is actually not that part. You have a couple others. Highlands Ranch Metropolitan District 1. This truck was actually back when Highlands Ranch had its own fire district. How long did that last? Well, that lasted till the spring. Apparently there was a grass fire in the spring, and they pulled their fancy new fire truck out just to find all the water was frozen in it. And it did not put out the wildfire very well. After that, they decided that they wanted to get out of the firefighting business, and they contracted it out to Littleton, who has been providing our fire services ever since. Talking about Littleton providing fire services, I captured the fire stations. But the unique thing about this one this is another one of those of perfect timing. I had literally pulled up just right across the street from the fire station to get out and take the picture. And as I was walking toward it, I noticed the lights on the fire truck come on and the fire truck start to pull away. So I ran up and I got the photo right as the trucks are going. So if you look in the photo, you can see the lights, a little bit you can see the lights are flashing, the trucks are moving. They're off to a call somewhere. So that was it. They were out the door right at that moment, just as I happened to approach. And so it's the action shot of the book. Another one I captured was Children's Hospital. This one had just opened, and this brings what apparently is the first of hospitals probably to our area. I just saw the article that says that big field behind Target's going to become a huge hospital complex too. So this is the first of the hospitals in our area. But here's Children's, and there's something about this photo, just the way the sunlight is reflecting off it and everything else, it just stood out. The other thing I wanted to point out, and you probably saw this in a lot of them, is when I was capturing the photos, especially being a black and white book, the clouds for a lot of the photos are just great. Most of them were not just blue skies, that we had these high clouds on a lot of photos that give that extra character into the black and white photos that you might not realize, but there was a lot of those out there. All right. Next, I got to meet a lot of people. I've met Terry Nolan. He's in the book. Joe Blake, who the water treatment plant is actually named after, is in our book. I got his photo from Metro Districts. Forrest Dykstra, who works for Metro Districts, his photo's in our book. Jeff Case, who has all the photos, I got him in. Jim Topher is in there a couple times. Marion Morgan, who is the last resident of the mansion, she's in the book. We got Jamie LaRue, who the library is named after, so I got a photo of him in the book. And then in the middle, I got Phil Riley, Steve Osterton, who apparently he's also been on the director and a bunch of other high-level positions in Metro District. And then I was asking around because I was trying to identify the lady. Was she also a high-placed person in Metro Districts, someone that we should know? Well, after asking around, I actually found out her backstory. She was actually a model that was hired for this picture. So I thought that was really funny. Another thing I captured was, in modern times, the concerts at the park. So if you've been out, this is where they do a lot of the concerts now. And I wanted to just capture this because this, to me, is such a big area. As you can see all the people, you can see all the kids playing on the fields. So this was actually one of the last photos I captured because I knew it had to happen, and I knew I had to get it done before the fall because once the concert season ended, I couldn't go back and retake this photo. So you have them, and you have, I believe on that evening, the $6 Million Band was playing. So that's hanging out watching that photo at the concert. All right, and that brings us into our last set of photos here. And this is the one that led up to the final photo in the book. The final photo in the book, if you've seen it, is actually a photo from Wildcat Mountain. This is Wildcat Mountain. It's over on the east side of Highlands Ranch. Now, I went up in the late summer or the year before, and I took this photo, like I took a lot of the photos with my iPhone. It was good enough for most of the photos in there. Well, I wanted this to be the big 2-photo spread to close the book. Well, they came back to me in, I think it was February or something, and said, yeah, everything's good except for that last photo. It's not high enough resolution. Well, if you know anything about Wildcat Mountain, in the spring, they close it. So you can't get to Wildcat Mountain because it's closed to nesting raptors. And so this presented me a problem. But it also presented me something that I noticed even when I put this slide together. That rock earlier in the presentation, it's hiding right there. Didn't notice that before. But so I ended up having to call back to HRCA, who is actually the ones that are in charge of this area, talk to the ranger that's in charge of Wildcat Mountain, said, I really need this photo. And I sent him a copy of the photo. I said, do you have any photos like it? He looked through his archives and said, no, I don't have any photos like that. I said, is there any way I can do that? And he looked at the photo and he said, okay, if you tell me the exact time you're going to go up there and you walk straight to the side of the mountain and straight back, don't disturb anything, you can go get this photo. So I got with my dad, who has a nice higher powered camera, and we walked right out there to the point and captured
the final photo of the book. And so this is a book from the top of Wildcat Mountain, looking over Highlands Ranch today, capturing the open space of backcountry, one of the high schools, which everyone always says that's where we ranch out here at Highlands Ranch, and then all the homes. Now, what I didn't realize even when I captured this photo, this wasn't until later on, was all the things you can see from Wildcat Mountain. You actually can see a little bit here. Kind of look at this area, right in through there. You can spot a building. Close up to that building, it's the Southridge Rec Center. So, figure out the Southridge Rec Center. You can also see the Mormon church that's nearby. And I believe that's the medical building that's also back there. And I'm like, oh, cool, we found these little things in the photo. Well, going back to the photo, as I looked a little bit closer, what I really started looking at was along here, kind of what I call the horizon of Highlands Ranch. If you look along the horizon of Highlands Ranch really closely, at the top of Wildcat Mountain, you can see Mountain Vista High School, Mountain Ridge Middle School. You can follow along, find the windmill at the ranch. If you keep following, this one surprised me, you can see Children's Hospital. You can see the buildings on Lucent, that you can actually see those from the top of Wildcat Mountain. As you can follow along, Cherry Hills Church and Valor Christian. All those were visible, even when I couldn't really see them with the naked eye. If you truly look, you truly know where to look. All this can be captured from that last final photo at the top of Wildcat Mountain. And that brings me to the next phase of this process, which is sharing all this information, sharing the book with everybody else. So, thank you very much for coming out. If you have any questions.